اوكي.
صباح الخير، مرحبا واهلا وسهلا بكم جميعا في الجلسه العامه حول موضوع مناقشه مواضيعيه بشان جهود اصحاب المصلحه المتعددين لتحقيق التعافي الاخضر. اسمحوا لي بدايه ببعض النقاط التنظيميه. بالنسبه للمشاركين معنا افتراضيا عبر منصه زوم، الرجاء ابقاء الميكروفون الخاص بكم في وضعيه الصامت ميوت إلا عند المشاركة بالكلام. يمكنكم التوجه إلى المنظمين ومدير الجلسة بأي سؤال أو تعليق عبر خانة الشات في أي وقت. بعد انتهاء حلقة الحوار يمكنكم طلب الكلام للمشاركة بمداخلة مسموعة أو سؤال من خلال الضغط على رمز رفع اليد. يوفر هذا الاجتماع ترجمة فورية ب3 لغات: إنجليزية، عربية وفرنسية، ويمكنكم الاستماع إلى العروض أو النقاش باللغة التي تريدونها من خلال اختيار اللغة عبر خاصية الترجمة الفورية إشارة الكرة الأرضية Interpretation المتوفرة إلى جانب باقي الخدمات على المنصة، وهي عادة ما تكون في أسفل الشاشة. بالنسبة للحضور معنا اليوم في هذه القاعة من بيت الأمم المتحدة في بيروت، يمكنكم استخدام أجهزة الترجمة المتوفرة لهذه الغرفة، كما يمكن المشاركة بمداخلات أو أسئلة بعد انتهاء حلقة الحوار. والآن يشرفني أن أعطي الكلام إلى مدير الجلسة الدكتور جمال الصغير، أستاذ الممارسات في المعهد لدراسة التنمية الدولية في جامعة ماجيل. تفضل دكتور.
صباح الخير جميعا. رح بلش احكي بالانجليزي، بس الجلسه بتكون بالعربي، بالانجليزي، بالفرنسي، مثل بدكم. خليني نبلش اول شيء اعطيكم رايي بالموضوع. In the aftermath of COVID-19, governments around the world have deployed extraordinary policy measures to save lives and protect people's livelihood. And given the gravity of this crisis, significant further effort will be needed, especially during the recovery phase. But if this recovery is to be sustainable, if our region is to become more resilient, we must do everything to promote a green recovery. In other words, taking measure how to fight the climate crisis is not just a nice to have, it's a must have if we are to live in a better world for our children. So what can government do? Let me highlight, in my opinion, 2 main priorities. First, we need to use public support wisely. Therefore, when government provide financial lifetime to carbon-intensive companies, they should mandate commitment to reduce carbon emission. And government need to prioritize investment in green technology, clean transport, sustainable agriculture, and climate resilience. Second, we need to promote green finance. We need to continue the emphasis on using green bonds, another form of sustainable finance. And in light of the extended use of government guarantees, part of them can be deployed to mobilize private finance for green investment. And financial firms have to be mandated to better disclose climate risk in their lending and investment portfolio. And more broadly, we need to find better ways of pricing climate risk. In this context, what do we need to do here? We need to reshape our economy and our society. It will reshape our future growth. And coming out of one crisis, the COVID crisis, need not to preclude to getting into another one. We have one coming now, which is a major recession, could be perceived as a crisis. It will also reshape our future growth. And combining one crisis will be important to bridge to a more resilient future. In this context, the objective of these sessions are to establish the merit of green recovery for the Arab region, present the policy option for green recovery, to elicit direction from donors, and we will focus on السياسات الخضراء، البنية التحتية الخضراء، الفرص الخضراء، والتمويل الأخضر. I have the honor to moderate this panel with esteemed colleague, and let me start by asking our colleague, Ms. Shada Al-Sharif, Senior Advisor, Prime Minister, Delivery Office in the Kingdom of Jordan, her opinion on 2 points. First, how did the COVID pandemic policy framework for green growth in Jordan? What can the Arab learn from the experience of Jordan? How can countries in the Arab region leverage climate change, mitigation, adaptation as a driver for job creation and sustainable development? Madam Sharif, you have the floor.
So much.
You have 8 minutes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jamal, and my regards to ESQA and all the organizers of this very important event. Sending you all my warm greetings from Jordan. So, Doctor, thank you for your first question on how COVID-19 impacted the policy framework in Jordan. To be honest, Jordan already had quite an ambitious green growth and climate change policy framework even pre-COVID. This included the National Green Growth Plan, which was launched in 2017, which was the first of its kind in the region at the time. And it contained a roadmap of opportunities for green economic transition in key sectors. When we say green, in Jordan's context, we're talking about economic growth that is both environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive. Jordan was one of the first countries in the region.
على الميكروفون لنسمعك أحسن لو سمحتي.
أكيد دكتور. ما بعرف إذا هيك أحسن الصوت شوية. هيك تمام؟ سامعنا منيح؟
Go ahead.
All right, excellent. Let me just make sure. Yeah, my AirPods should be connected. So that was the first point, is that pre-COVID, Jordan already had a pretty ambitious green growth program. It was one of the first countries actually to launch a climate change policy back in 2013 and a climate change bylaw in 2019. But what I think happened in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, Jordan was really well placed to adopt as the so-called Build Back Better approach by operationalizing these policy frameworks. So out of the Green Growth Plan, Jordan produced 6 national action plans, the Green Growth National Action Plans, one for each of the key sectors. So we're talking about waste, water, energy, transportation, tourism, and agriculture. And I think the renewed focus because of COVID on water, energy, food security prompted us in Jordan and added to the urgency of a green economic recovery. I think another important factor was the momentum leading up to COP26, where Jordan actually issued its updated NDCs in October of last year, increasing its ambition to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 31% by 2030, and including an updated list of climate actions and financing needs. I think important to remember that the work in Jordan is not only happening at the national level, but also at the city level, where Greater Amman municipality also last year launched a Green City Action Plan and a Climate Action Plan with a focus on adaptation and mitigation in the urban development sector. And other actually municipalities outside of Amman prepared so-called CCAPs or Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plans. So while the Ministry of Environment actively worked on all of these issues, I actually had the pleasure to support the Ministry of Planning in mainstreaming climate change and green economy in other planning frameworks for Jordan, so such as the 5-year economic reform matrix, and the work I'm currently doing in my hat at the Prime Ministry to update Jordan's economic priorities program. So the issue is green recovery issues are moving away not just from the Ministry of Environment, but actually integrating with planning and other financing frameworks. So I think that answers hopefully your first question. Regarding what can Arab region learn from the experience in Jordan, I think the importance of a regulatory policy framework is key. For example, Jordan's Renewable Energy Law of 2012 was the cornerstone for the deployment of a renewable energy market 10 years ago, and all the FDI that came into Jordan as a result. Jordan's experience with power purchase agreements paved the way to exchange experience with Egypt and UAE at the time as they embarked on their own plans. Similarly, I think the climate change bylaw of 2019 allowed Jordan to create a national climate change committee. This is a kind of institutional mechanism that I think can be shared and perhaps replicated in other countries in the region. I think it's also important to bear in mind that we're not just talking about regulatory policy frameworks, but a lot of these things have translated into projects on the ground. For example, if you come to Amman, you will be able to see a first of a kind waste to energy plant which is resulting in 40% savings of the electricity bill of Greater Amman municipality. You'll also be able to see a most energy efficient wastewater treatment plant, a Simra, solar and wind projects that are now more than 10% of our energy mix, 30,000 electric vehicles in the roads, and a vibrant ecotourism sector. So I would say Jordan has also successfully attracted climate finance. We keep hearing that the Arab region has not really gotten its fair share of climate finance, and that remains to be true. But I think there is room for experience sharing on unlocking, for example, funding from the Green Climate Fund. Other countries in the region have done this as well. Jordan recently received a $33 million US dollar agriculture project through the GCF. But also, it's the important role of national financing vehicles. In a previous hat, I was a director of the Environment Fund at the ministry. And this is a vehicle that was able to get into partnerships with the private sector, with NGOs, to really implement environmental projects at the local level. So Jordan is also, as you mentioned, Dr. Jamal, considering innovative financing tools such as debt for nature swaps, green bonds, and looking now after COP26 at, how can we bring market mechanisms back to life? So I think Jordan can share lessons with the region on the regulatory policy framework, on its partnership structures, on the actual projects that can serve as pilots to be replicated in Jordan and at the regional level. I think it's very important to bear in mind that any inclusive growth strategy has to be tailored to every country's specific circumstances, be it on their institutional capacity, their sources of finance, and their own specific socio-economic and environmental challenges. In terms of the last question,
I think,
on how...
unfortunately, your 8 minutes are gone. So
okay,
I will give
Doctor.
you, but I will take the privilege to give you 50 seconds.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So on parting remarks, I will just say that, as we all know, climate and SDG agenda is a challenging one, but I think it's a big opportunity for a country like Jordan with unemployment soaring post-COVID. We believe here, and we're already taking steps, that applying a climate and SDG lens in our national planning and financing frameworks is something that will unlock economic opportunities. It will increase the country's resilience. So I think this agenda is an opportunity for Jordan, but also an opportunity for regional cooperation, specifically when I talk about interconnection on renewable energy and interconnection on our grids, as well as the water energy food nexus, where our countries can complement one another through our relative competitive advantage. Okay. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Shada, for giving us pretty good framework of discussion. I will come back to you during the overall discussion on specific issue, but I'm going to give you the highlights so you can prepare if you and yourself. I would love to hear much more when we have the discussion about the water business, which is water for green. Water has always been a challenging issue since my time working on Jordan. The wastewater agenda in particular in the context of the green recovery. I would love to hear much more about the debt sustainability versus issuing any green bond. We've seen that Egypt has issued $1 billion green bond. There is another $1 billion coming in the pipeline. Another word that I would love to hear also, what are the constraints that Jordan are facing to go to much more speedy recovery, given your debt ceiling and your macroeconomic framework, which is very fragile, as you know. So this is what we'll discuss, but I'm giving you a heads up. Let me now ask my friend, Salim, who's here, to discuss green infrastructure. Salim, what we need to hear from you, in the past, green infrastructure were perceived as a trade-off between cost effectiveness and environmental sustainability. Does this remain true today in your experience at the World Bank? Is there a different way to envisage green infrastructure from a decision-making perspective? We've seen a lot of Ministry of Planning making plan. We've seen a lot of Ministry of Financing pushing back those plans. In other words, can we walk the talk in this region about green financing, not only just wish for it and therefore green infrastructure? And green infrastructure should be delivered ecological, social, and economic benefit. Could you describe some example, some lesson learned from the World Bank in the Arab region, and how best to leverage green infrastructure prioritization within a country development program and make it work? And Salim is currently Sustainable Development Program leader for the Mashriq at the World Bank, and is a very long friend.
Thank you, Dr. Jamal, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I don't know where the camera is and where to look, but I'll spare the detail. I think you introduced in your opening remarks the global transition that's happening. So the momentum that's ongoing globally somehow around green financing and the green transition globally. But I think that there is one element maybe to complement that, to segue into my to segue into my answering your two questions, which is that the global transition today is somehow putting a major constraint on developing countries, particularly when it comes to access to financing. So in almost 2 years' time, most MDBs, most bilaterals will stop financing non-green projects. So this transition is happening. So to introduce that global transition when it comes to green, to climate, but also to the financing instruments that will be available to countries, I think it's a very important segue to the thinking of countries on how they should adapt as well to be able to tap into green financing. And Shada presented earlier the big questions on nature for finance or debt for nature, etc. A lot of initiatives that are today being developed and structured by the international community so that developing countries and economies can have access to alternate and different type of financing. So in the past, the trade-off was, rich countries could go green and poor countries and middle-income countries don't have to make that kind of decision quite fast because they need to go scale. So they need to invest in more roads, in more drainage, in more sewage, in more things. And the quality and the green and climate nature of those investments seem to be quite not of a priority yet. But moving forward, particularly when we frame things through the global transition, green transition, the global green finance environment that is being created, developing countries need to rethink that model for themselves. They need to start thinking about what are the trade-offs they need to make internally, what are the no-regret investments they should start doing, and how to make sure that infrastructure financing that they're going to be doing when it comes to mitigation or adaptation are instruments to create green jobs, to develop knowledge, to develop skills, to link those projects with academia so that they don't only be on the receiving side of infrastructure or financing or technology, but they also use that as an opportunity to start developing their own hubs of excellence and skills, etc., and then start exporting that. So just to go back to Jordan, Jordan is trying its best to enter to frame its capacity within that framework. So Jordan, through a lot of effort done on renewable, on electric vehicles, on water efficient agriculture, etc., they are trying to be somehow a center of excellence in the region and trying then to export that knowledge to other countries that are somehow lagging behind in those skill sets. So Arab countries need to rethink how they will be able to integrate that infrastructure and into their green transition modality, and then try to develop the ecosystem and the environment around it so that they don't only invest, but invest so that they can learn and then export and scale. To go into the second question, as Jamal, you had initiated, at the bank right now, we are developing an instrument called the Country Climate and Development Report. And those Country Climate and Development Report, which we are piloting today in 4 countries in the MENA region, particularly in the Mashreq, where I cover are Jordan and Iraq, and next year is going to be Lebanon. We are trying as much as possible to close the loop on those key questions. How does climate, the green transition, investments and infrastructure link to the overall development agenda of the country, so that development and investing in green infrastructure and in green transition within the country are not contradictory but complementary. For example, in Iraq, we're focusing a lot on the water and energy. On energy, quick wins relate to gas flaring. So those are public investments, bringing also the private sector so that you can easily reduce a large chunk of your GHG emissions. but also how to invest better in protecting your cities, such as Baghdad, Basra, etc., against natural disasters, against important transition in terms of heat and what that will have implication on labor, etc., etc. For Jordan, it's really, you know, the elements that Shada put on the table, and I mentioned earlier, it's really positioning Jordan in terms of skills, in terms of education, in terms of investments, into how to link all of those to transform the Jordanian economy comprehensively into a green economy. And I think that's the wish that Jordan wants to put itself on, and the track it wants to put itself on. But then I think that the challenge is how to key and how to align those dots within a fiscally constrained environment, and how eventually for Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, and other countries in the region to leverage on the environment and the global environment around green financing that will be available to them. I'll close with the Lebanon, not only because it's my country, but because we're launching the Green Recovery Framework for the country soon. And Lebanon, as we all know, is witnessing maybe the worst crisis in its history, the compound crisis. And there is a major maybe challenge and constraint, and I won't use worst words on that, on the public sector domain, but the private sector has already moved and is trying to move as much as possible into the green economy, into export, greening their export, greening their tourism. So the initiatives are there, but there are limitations if we don't shift that also into public initiatives, bring that into policy like Jordan is doing, bring that into public investment, and accompany that green transition that the private sector is trying to do to keep afloat in its global, in this global competitive market into the public sector. So just those are a few words I had. Thank you, and sorry if I extended by a bit, so thank you.
No, you're okay, Salim. But before we move on, I just already want to put a red flag on the table. This is a region where we have to move on the mitigation side very surely to transit our energy system and move toward low carbon economy. But this is a region as well, because of the water issue, food security issue, you have to adapt very quickly. It's the only region in the world actually where mitigation adaptation have to go in parallel in a very aggressive way. And by the way, they're not going neither here, neither there. We can talk about it because this is not convincing argument. What I would love to hear is on the ground on Monday morning, what are people doing exactly to transit toward low carbon economy, toward better water and energy efficiency, with all what I've seen. Sorry, no, you will speak at the end. Now we have a panelist and I'm moderating. I think at this stage, what I would love to hear from our colleague as we move on, how we tackle this challenge of mitigation and transiting to green economy, while at the same time, we have to transit to adaptation, which is part of the green framework, which is also not moving as aggressive. In this context, maybe the first item, and that's what Ms. Noura Mansouri, my friend, research fellow at the Energy Transition and Electric Power in Saudi Arabia, could give us an idea based on her long experience on circular economy. She's one of the experts, and I know she has done a lot of paper in part of the G20. So Noura, from your experience and what you have seen happening at the COP26 in 2001, and what are the most relevant for energy transition in the Arab region? And as we move to COP27 in Egypt, and then COP28 in Abu Dhabi or Dubai, what will be, in your views, the major important item that should be put on the table by the Arab region? Because first, in the context of the next COP, it's the Africa COP, but North Africa is covered pretty well. The next COP will be probably our Arab COP in the Emirates. And if we miss that opportunity at the COP to have a good negotiation package, we may have to wait a long time. So in your experience, who have been living the G20 experience as well, what have you seen, what could be? And what could be the technology that could allow us to have that transition? And how do we ensure that countries at different level of development can go in this transition? What happened in Saudi Arabia is different from happening in Libya, and what's happening in Morocco, what's happening in other parts of the Gulf. So from your observation as a fellow, what's your views on the issue? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jamal. It's a pleasure for me to be here. So I'd like to thank the invitees, the UN ESCWA, for the invitation. So to tackle the question and also your profound statement early on, Dr. Jamal, just to zoom out a little bit, of course, COP26 came at an important time. What added to that importance is that in 2020, as you all know, the world was hit with COVID-19, and it canceled many of the important, let's say, environmental conferences, including COP26. But at the same time, we had the G20 as a multilateralism, effective multilateralism that sort of filled the gap. And in 2020, more specifically, during the Saudi presidency, Saudi succeeded in introducing the circular carbon economy, which was endorsed by all the G20 countries. But before talking about the CCE, let me answer your first question, which is what are the outcomes from COP26? We all went, I mean, I was there in Glasgow, and there was a lot of excitement around finishing the Paris Agreement rulebook, finishing the outstanding issues that were really outstanding for years. And also because of the COVID, now that we're back, people were very excited to raise the ambition even further. And there was always this resistance by developing countries, including the Arab League and the GCC and Saudi Arabia negotiating on their behalves. So just to summarize very quickly, the outcomes that are deemed important for us is that, of course, in the covered decisions, for the very first time formally recognizing that climate change will be much lower at 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this is really the first time that it is formally endorsed in a COP document. So the word resolve that was used in the covered decision indicate an operative mechanism that will really exert pressure on countries to pursue efforts to reduce warming to 1.5, and then indicating that this needs to happen, reducing CO2 by 45% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. So this is quite important for our region. And then, of course, the famous phasing out, but crossing that and making it more flexible to phasing down unabated coal. So this is also phasing down on inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. This, of course, exerts pressure, especially on oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia and the GCC. But thankfully, there was a qualifier added in the covered decision, so maintaining or providing support and subsidies for developing countries such as the Arab world. And so maintaining equity, common but differentiated responsibility, and international cooperations. So these are the three sort of things that we need to hold on to and continue to push in the agenda in COP27 in Egypt, as well as in COP28 in the UAE. Another outcome that was important is the carbon markets. As I said, in COP26, we finally finalized the Paris Agreement rulebook, including the carbon markets, where there was an agreement to include non-CO2 metric, as well as have a free market to exchange emission reduction unit, and an agreement to carry over all of the CDM project, which is the Clean Development Mechanism in the past. And this was important to a lot of African states, including Arab countries. Another outcome under transparency is an agreement to ensure flexibility in the reporting. And that was something that the Arab League has been pushing for, Saudi Arabia as well, and developing countries or like-minded developing countries in general, due to the cost that is associated with this reporting, as some of these tables cost up to $1 million. And so if you have consistent reporting, this is not quite possible for developing countries and less developed countries. So there was an agreement to ensure flexibility, and more specifically for oil producing countries and Saudi Arabia and the GCC, is to have simple tables to track the progress of the NDCs, or the National Determined Contributions, and inserting a decision text to protect the confidential information of oil companies, hydrocarbon companies, petrochemical companies. And this is particularly important for countries in our region that have a single actor in these sectors. So if you have a single actor in the oil sector and a single actor in the petrochemical sector, you cannot really provide this confidential information. So that was a huge win as well. In terms of common timeframes, very quickly, reporting every 5 years for all countries, developed and developing. Encouragement also, the word was used, encouragement. So there is no shall or should. This also was on like a win for our region. And in terms of response measures, there was an agreement to submit inputs to the global stocktake. This is important because, especially your question, Dr. Jamal, on mitigation and adaptation. So in our region, the economic diversification leads to mitigation. So this was ensured in this outcome of COP26. And then climate finance was doubled. This is always good for developing countries. And finally, the adaptation fund, ensuring accessibility to all the developing countries. What does that mean? Like, what is the implications really in our Arab world? I'd like to highlight first, I mean, it is true that we have the upcoming COPs in our region, in Egypt and the UAE, but it's also important to be realistic and think of the way forward as things will become even more ambitious. We are expecting even more ambitious targets, especially with the use of the term resolving the 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this exerts pressure on developing countries to act even more. Also, the phasing down of unabated coal. What do we expect to hear next? Is it phasing down or phasing out unabated coal? After coal, there must be also phasing down or we're expecting phasing down or phasing out of other hydrocarbons like oil and gas, etc. Perhaps oil, gas is still seen as a clean transition fuel. So this is where things are. Of course, implications in the reporting, there might be even more reporting, more pressure in reporting. But what's important, and I'd like to highlight that, is that for developing countries, for the Arab countries, we have to maintain equity, common but differentiated responsibility, and international cooperation. And especially for developing countries, like-minded developing countries as well, is to ask for finance and human capacity development, technology development for any mitigation effort by developing countries. So this is about the COP26. I can highlight more about the circular carbon economy.
You have to go a bit quickly to the second question.
Yes, so the circular carbon economy, as I was mentioned, was proposed by Saudi Arabia and endorsed by all the G20 countries. And the importance of CCE really is that it allows the national circumstances, it allows for the national circumstances, and it gives options for all the countries to choose any energy technology. So it shifts the discussion from talking about the energy sources, whether it's fossil fuels or others, to managing the emissions. And there are many technologies that can be utilized for such a transition. The circular carbon economy is built on 4 main pathways: reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove. Under reduce, we have renewable energy, energy efficiency, nuclear energy. Under reuse and recycle is looking at the CO2 and not solely as a negative externality, but as an important feedstock for the industry, such as synthetic fuels, fertilizers and urea, methanols and chemicals, polymers, concrete. So using the CO2 as an important feedstock, and then also looking at it as a win-win, such as the CO2 enhanced oil recovery, using CO2 enhanced water recovery as well. And then you have the remove, the natural sinks, such as, afforestation, soil, direct air capture. And on the natural sinks, Saudi Arabia has also announced the Middle East Green Initiative and the Saudi Green Initiative to plant 40 billion trees across the region, as well as 10 billion trees across Saudi Arabia. And this is one of the important initiatives that Saudi Arabia has succeeded in doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. You gave us a very good picture about what's happened at COP26, the prospect for COP27, the technology breakthrough, some of the idea that will be pushed in the region, and I do hope we can scale up and speed up, which brings me now to another set of opportunities. And I would like to ask Ms. Hajjar Kamalishi to give us her perspective as an entrepreneur. Being entrepreneur is already being challenging by definition. Now, work in a green environment as an entrepreneur and integrating the gender lens into a green recovery will be another challenge. So what I would like to hear from Ms. Hajjar, what's your perspective on this issue? How you see this constraint? How things could move quicker? What kind of coalition this Arab region should do? What kind of lesson learned should we bring South-South? I think there are a lot of lessons learned we can learn from Brazil, from China, from Indonesia, and somehow all the lessons learned go across the Arab world. They never get here on time or in the right place or with the right people. What kind of entrepreneurship ideas that you can put on the table to bridge the gap that we have seen happening in this region? Floor is yours.
Thank you. شكرا دكتور جمال. حقيقة هناك فرص وتحديات رئيسية يواجهها رواد المشاريع الخضراء في المنطقة العربية. على المستوى الإقليمي ينشط رواد المشاريع الخضراء في مجموعة من القطاعات الاقتصادية وأهمها كفاءة الموارد بالخصوص إدارة نفايات المستدام بنسبة 25%، تليها الطاقة المتجددة بنسبة 21%، ثم الغذاء المستدام بنسبة 16%، وتليها بنسب منخفضة أكثر مشاريع حول البناء المستدام والسياحة البيئية أو الإيكوتوريزم. لذلك يمثل رواد المشاريع الخضراء فرصة مهمة لجلب الابتكارات المستدامة إلى قلب الاقتصاد مثل بلدان المنطقة العربية. ومن هذا المنظور تحتاج الشركة الناشئة الخضراء إلى الدعم في شكل سياسات عامة، وأيضا المزيج الصحيح بآلية التمويل لتحقيق إمكاناتها. بالإضافة إلى ذلك يبدو أن التمويل هو القضية الرئيسية التي تواجه المشاريع الخضراء في العالم العربي، كما عبر عنها ثلث المستجيبين في استطلاع نشر عبر بوابة سويتشرز في عام 2017. يمكن أن يكون مستوى المعرفة المالية لأصحاب المشاريع الخضراء الخضراء عائقاً مهماً أمام الوصول إلى الخدمات المالية، والذين ليسوا على دراية بها أو بالمنتجات المالية ليسوا مرتاحين بما فيه الكفاية، لذلك فهم لن يطلبوها بكل بساطة. هناك نقص ملحوظ في دعم السياسات لأصحاب المشاريع الخضراء كما هو الحال في معظم بلدان إقليم الشرق الأوسط وشمال إفريقيا، وتظل جوانب السياسية لريادة الأعمال الخضراء جديدة نسبياً، ولا تزال أدوار جميع اللاعبين في النظام الاقتصادي والحكومة متأخراً. علاوة على ذلك هناك مفاهيم خاطئة حول خصائص رواد الأعمال وخاصة رواد المشاريع الخضراء، مما يعيق زيادة تطوير النظام الاقتصادي والبيئي الخاص بالمجتمع. كمثال مثلا يحتل المغرب المرتبة الأولى في منطقة الشرق الأوسط شمال إفريقيا وفقا لمؤشر المستقبل الأخضر لسنة 2020 الذي وضعه فريق MIT لقياس تقدم والتزام 76 دولة بتعزيز اقتصاد منخفض الكربون، حيث اتخذت الحكومة خطوات في شكل تقديم حوافز للاستثمار في الشركات الناشئة ومركزية المعلومات لخدمة رواد الأعمال بشكل أفضل، ومع ذلك لا توجد معرفة واسعة النطاق بهذه الجهود وسط المجتمع. وهناك فرص جديدة لرواد الأعمال للنمو، ولكن البيئة الداعمة الشاملة تحتاج إلى تدخل أكثر استهدافاً لتمكين وصول رواد الأعمال من الشباب والنساء إلى السوق. وعلى وجه التحديد السياسات والموارد المواتية وثقافة ريادة الأعمال المرنة لتشجيع النمو المستقبلي. ووفقاً لرواد المشاريع الشابة المستجوبين تشمل القيود المختلفة التي تضاعف زخم ريادة الأعمال في العالم العربي ما يلي: الوصول إلى التمويل، حيث كان الافتقار إلى الموارد المائية عقبة رئيسية لا سيما أنهم لم يتمكنوا من إثبات لمحيطهم أن مشاريعهم تنطوي على إمكانات للتأثير الاقتصادي، وبالتالي العثور على مستثمر مهتم. التحدي الآخر هو التعقيد في تلبية متطلبات والوثائق اللازمة للوصول لهذه المنتجات، منتجات الدعم المالي. إمكانية الوصول إلى السوق هو جانب جد مهم ومن أكبر العقبات، حيث أن ليس هناك سوق وافر لرواد المشاريع الخضراء بالخصوص. لقد وجدوا عموما أن سوق البلدان العربية على الصعيد المحلي صغير ويصعب الوصول إليه، والحجم والطلب غير مواتيين لممارسة الأعمال التجارية. ويتفق الخبراء ورواد الأعمال على أن السوق والعطاءات العامة لا يمكن الوصول إليها فعليا. فغالبا ينظر إلى أن المستهلكين يفضلون الشركات الكبرى أو الشركات المتعددة الجنسية التي تم إنشاؤها بشكل أفضل بدلا من رواد الأعمال الخضراء الأصغر حجما، نظرا لحقيقة الأمر أنه غالبا ما يحكم عليها على أنها أقل خبرة أو أن التكنولوجيا المستخدمة لم يتم إثباتها بعد. من بين الحواجز أو التحديات تحدي الثقافة. غالبا ما يكون هناك تصور ثقافي سلبي يتعلق بوضع نشاط تجاري خاص أو رائد أعمال، وغالبا ما ينظر إليه على أنه استثمار عالي المخاطر بدلا من شغل وظيفة تقليدية في الحكومة أو شركة متعددة الجنسيات تستحق التعليم الذي تم تلقيه. وسلط الأشخاص الذين تمت مقابلتهم الضوء على هذا التحدي ووجدوا صعوبة في إثبات قيمة مشاريعهم ونجاحهم لعائلاتهم وداخل مجتمعاتهم. هذه المفاهيم الخاطئة تحد من الدعم الذي يتلقونه حاليا، وبالتالي قدرتهم على التوسع وإحداث تأثير دائم وأكبر في الاقتصاد. بالإضافة إلى ذلك لا يعرف رواد المشاريع الأخضر أنفسهم دائما على هذا النوع، ولا يتلقون بالضرورة دعما من حاضنات تركز على البيئة أو لذلك لا يتم تبنيهم من قبل منظمات الدعم المركزة على الجرين ليبل أو الخضراء. كما أنهم يفتقرون أحيانا إلى الاعتراف والمصداقية اللازمة لملاحقتهم. هناك تحدي آخر عنده علاقة بطبيعة المشاريع، حيث أن هناك مفهوم خاطئ عن ريادة الأعمال الخضراء أنها كلها تتعلق بالتقنيات أو الخدمات التي هي بالأساس أجهزة بطبيعتها، وهذا هو ليس الحال دائما.
أوكي سيدة هاجر، عندك بعد 50 ثانية.
تواجه رائدة الأعمال على وجه الخصوص مشكلات إضافية صعبة تم تسليط الضوء عليها خلال هذه المقابلات. يواجهن قدرا كبيرا من الأفكار المسبقة والصور النمطية في عدة مراحل من تطوير مشاريعهم، وغالبا ما يتم التقليل من أهمية قادة المشاريع النسائية وينظر إليها على أنهن غير قادرات على إدارة هذه المشاريع، ولا سيما عندما يتعلق الأمر بمشروع تقني أو مشروع إنشائي. هناك اعتقاد أيضا خاطئ بأن النساء لا يمكنهن أن يشغلن هذه الوظائف لعدم التوفير بين حياتهن الشخصية والعملية، وهناك تحدي كبير متعلق بالتشبيك وإنشاء شبكة أعمال لرائدة الأعمال في العالم العربي. غالبا ما تكون صعبة ويتم إجراؤها بطرق غير رسمية مقارنة بشبكة أكثر احترافا ورسميا بالنسبة لرواد الأعمال الشباب. وتعد أيضا فهناك حسب تقرير للمرصد العالمي لريادة الأعمال هناك نوايا تصل إلى 36% من رائدة الأعمال الإناث في العالم العربي لإنشاء المقاولات، بينما في الواقع تصل إلى 12% فقط بمقارنة مع 31% بالنسبة للرجال البالغين. وتظل ريادة الأعمال النسائية هي موردا رئيسيا غير مستغل في المنطقة، حيث يتماشى هذا التحدي مع اتجاه إقليمي كبير. الفرص
سيدة هاجر، بعتذر بس إذا فيك تعملي الكونكلوجن.
أوكي. كتوصيات على المستوى الاجتماعي يمكن تمكين وصول أكبر للشباب ورائدة الأعمال إلى السوق، وتحديدا السياسات المواتية والموارد وثقافة ريادة الأعمال المرنة لتشجيع المستقبل النمو. ويمكن أن تكون هذه السياسات أكثر شمولا عبر توفير منصات للموردين والمقاولين وتمكينهم من الولوج إلى مناقصات عامة عبر إدراج indicators أو لإدراجهم في المناقصات العامة وتمكينهم من الولوج إلى الأسواق بطريقة أكثر سلاسة مقارنة مع الشركات الكبيرة والدولية.
اوكي، بعتذر منك بس هلا لما نروح وقت ال discussions I will have specific question for you, but many thanks.
Okay.
So far we discussed السياسات الخضراء، البنية التحتية، الفرص الخضراء، كله هيدا ما بيمشي إذا ما في تمويل. هلا لنحكي عن التمويل. And I'm very, very pleased to have two very good friends, Mr. Rami Ahmad, the Special Envoy on SDG, and Mr. Ahmad Atika, CEO of the Happy Corp. Ahmad, we would have loved to have you with us, but I know that you had some business in Saudi Arabia, so we have you online. Green finance is one of the biggest challenges in this region. This is the region which is getting among the lowest green funding, frankly, from anywhere when you compare to other region. Probably with sub-Saharan Africa and this region are getting the lowest percentage. Whatever from the Green Fund, whatever from the Sustainable Fund. And this is due to different issues. First, we don't have a lot of instruments. When we are lucky, we hear about green bonds. We were very happy to see Egypt, as I said earlier, issuing one. The others have difficulties to go in this direction. We rarely hear about climate risk insurance. We rarely hear about liquidity fund. We rarely hear about backstop facilities. All these instruments that exist in Latin America, East Asia, everywhere in the world, somehow, once again, they go beyond the region and they land somewhere else. So the question for both of you, I'm going to ask with Rami, and then Ahmad probably will build on the argument. In your institution, wherever at the Islamic Development Bank or APICOR, what are the green priorities? How do you see across country, least developing country, middle income country, GCC, conflict crisis, those kind of green policy, green finance happening or not happening? And in this context, how is green finance could be implemented? Is it the example of Jordan? Is it the aggressive model that we see happening in Egypt? Or is it the calm model that we have seen happening in Morocco, where they have been doing a lot? And we have a lot of to learn from Morocco, but somehow we don't talk about it enough. Or you have other people in the GCC country where they are doing green investment sometimes by accident, not necessarily by design, because they don't have any choice. They have to go to sustainable development. So what are the prospects for green bonds, green targeted loan, green investment fund, climate risk insurance, other instruments? And the golden question, why our sovereign funds are not investing in green funds or in green infrastructure or in green recovery? If the IMF is investing on those projects or this program or the World Bank, why those sovereign funds are not taking a bit much more risk? Let me start with Rami. We can't hear you. You are muted. We can't hear you.
Yes, it's the floor for me. Yes. First of all, good morning, good afternoon. Really, it's really delighted to see the focus on the financial aspect of green. I may have to add that the GCC areas or GCC countries have really came up with great models. Especially Saudi Arabia have recently announced the funds, the bonds in Fisuk al-Amwal.
Excuse me, Mr. Faisal, we still are not at the panelist discussion and the open discussion.
Sorry.
Still with the panelists.
Sorry.
So if you can hold your horses for another 20 minutes. Thank you. Rami, are you back? No. Okay, then while we technically resolve the issue of Rami, and I think somebody should resolve it here, let me maybe ask Ahmed to start. Yes. Ahmed, are you online? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, but I think Rami came back.
Rami, are you back? No. He's not back.
Okay.
We can't hear him. Can somebody call him?
Can you hear me?
Okay, Rami, I'm gonna ask Ahmed to start, and then we fix your technical issue, and then you come back. Ahmed, the floor is yours. Good to have you here.
Thank you very much أخي جمال والإخوة والأخوات الكرام على الدعوة الكريمة بداية للمشاركة في هذا الملتقى الهام، وأعتذر بشدة عن عدم قدرتي في آخر لحظة على أن أكون معكم حضوريا لالتزامات طارئة استجدت عندي هنا في السعودية. سأستخدم اللغتين العربية والإنجليزية interchangeably حتى نستطيع أن نوصل الأفكار بوضوح. I believe this session on or the segment of the session on the financing for green, as you said, Jamal, at the end everything else rests on the availability of financing. APICORP, the Arab Petroleum Investment Corporation, is the only multilateral energy-focused pan-Arab financial institution that basically finances and invests in petroleum and energy-related sectors. And from that perspective, we can only see, speaking about the region, I think, Jamal, you mentioned a number of realities about green financing in the region, but there are also some positive features that are emerging. We can only see more application of the ESG-aligned investment practices throughout the finance and banking spectrum in the region. At the end of the day, applying ESG frameworks that govern green financing improves the risk profile of investments and of financing transactions, and allows for the risk assessment to be done from a multiple dimensions, combined also with enhanced reporting and disclosure, which have become very important features and prerequisites. In that regard, if we take the numbers very quickly, we see that the MENA green and sustainability linked bonds issued in 2021 more than tripled from 2016 to 2020, reaching around $19 billion with an increase of 120% from the previous 2020 record of only $5 billion. This includes, you mentioned green bonds in the region, Jamal, this includes the $750 million APICORP green bond, which I will talk about momentarily. We have also seen green and sustainable sukuk issuances in the region, also continued in 2021, and I believe my colleague Rami can speak about the success that the Islamic Development Bank has shown in issuing a sizable sukuks earlier this year. We have also seen the region's first carbon trading platform in Saudi Arabia. a voluntary carbon trading scheme by the Saudi Stock Exchange, Tadawul, paving the way for the development of a formal carbon market for trading emissions and credits, and I believe for oil exporters in the region, particularly in the sectors of hydrocarbon, petrochemicals, and heavy industry producers. I think a carbon trading platforms to offset part of their emissions are innovative and new products in the market. This brings me to the role of the multilateral banks in the region and in general to support green financing. As I mentioned, back in September 2021, APICorp issued the first ever green bond for an energy-focused multilateral financial institution in the region with a resounding success, actually success that exceeded all expectations. We issued a $750 million paper, green paper, that was 3 times oversubscribed, that was bought by 93% of the investors that bought the paper were hardcore ESG accounts from Europe and the US, buying a paper produced by a financial institution that's owned by the 10 Arab oil and petroleum producers, from a bank that has petroleum in its name. This is not by any mean a small breakthrough. And maybe in the questions and answers, I can shed more lights on how did that happen and why did these hardcore ESG investors believed in the energy transition and the green journey that this region and the member states of APICorp, again, the 10 Arab oil producers have started and have engaged in. And finally, I think the partnerships between Arab financial institutions, and we have 2 of them in the session, including the Islamic Development Bank, is key if the green financing and supporting the energy transition of the region is to succeed. At the end of the day, this region storyline of energy transition should have the dual objectives of both becoming green, but at the same time making sure that the hydrocarbon investments will continue to support the economic growth and the economic diversity of the region, albeit with a greener and cleaner instruments, but not to say that the energy transition is only in one direction and not the other. And I think the energy crisis that the world has started to see over the last few weeks substantiates the importance of having this dual objectives for green transition, for energy transition, using the green products that I spoke about. Shukran, Jamal.
Shukran كثير Ahmad. I will come back to you on the very interesting analysis of the demand and supply of green financial instrument. But maybe first I would love to ask Rami. Rami, from your perspective, the Islamic Development Bank, you heard the key conclusion of Ahmad, which is basically it's all about partnership. And it's important that partners in the region leverage each other. The Islamic Development Bank, together with Saudi Fund, Kuwait Fund, and other Abu Dhabi Fund and others, are key to make that transition. So can you give us your perspective on the 2 questions I asked earlier?
Okay, I hope you can hear me now. How can we cancel this? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? So sorry about that. Just a second.
You have too many microphones open. Can you close one?
Yes. Hello? Do you hear me now?
It's getting there. Don't change anything.
Now you hear me.
Deep breath and speak.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So sorry about that. Extremely sorry about that. And thank you very much again for inviting me. And thanks for Dr. Ahmed for bailing me out and for your patience over here. I would like to thank you, Jamal, for setting the question like this, but I would like to start from a different starting point. We in the Islamic Development Bank, we have 57 member countries. Developed, developing, least developed, fragile, you name it. But we need not to forget that none of these countries did have any cause in the crisis that we are dealing with. So sometimes we forget the genesis of the problem, and this is sometimes bring light where the responsibility in financing and bringing the funds need to be also anchored. We recognize clearly that developing nations need more careful and targeted support in the implementation of their own strategies that promote sustainable and climate resilient development as stipulated in the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. But we need to start from the development priorities of these countries. It's not isomorphic mimicry or it's a fad, it's a necessary thing, but the starting point should be the real needs of the developing countries. And we need to be mindful, of course, of the trade-offs between supporting an overall economic growth and the green growth. There's no argument that green growth is the way to go, but always there is this question of the developed world taking advantage for the past 2 decades, 2 centuries, basically, to get to where they are today. And we are asking the developing countries and the poor countries to basically do the right thing now. So we need to keep this trade-off between the overall economic growth and the green growth. Of course, this is we need to be mindful that this is also an opportunity for us to revitalize the region by providing new and improved employment conditions and opportunities for skill development with the increased knowledge intensity of the firms. This, by the way, holds largely irrespective of the particular set of circumstances our diverse membership finds itself in. Another point, I hope you are patient enough with that, the transition to green economy to tackle the threat of climate change is creating a new economic opportunity, of course. However, creating also other negative aspects that we need to deal with, displacing jobs, threatening livelihoods of people and communities and nations. Therefore, leaving no one behind requires the term that we use these days, just transition. And I think we need to speak about this just transition. And we commend the efforts of the Saudi Arabia presidency of the G20 a couple of years ago. And I bring attention to the presidency of Indonesia this year of the G20, which is also another opportunity for the voice of the South to be heard in the G20 forum. They committed to $100 billion, but you can see the reluctance sometimes from the rich countries to contribute. The bank, you asked me what the bank is doing. We realigned the strategy in IDB along the 3 pillars. One of the pillars, it's about boosting recovery, tackling poverty, and building resilience. And the third priority is driving a green economic growth. We are committed to having our green financing to be about 35% of the total financing by 2025, like many of the other MDBs. Pleased to record that we financed almost $700 million this year for green financing. But to your point, Jamal, only 1/3 of this is really on adaptation. And we need to do a lot. And I think other MDBs are also having the same issue. And the issue of adaptation and mitigation, you heard that in the COP26. Rich countries need to come through also with the focus on adaptation. We welcome this $100 billion, but it's voluntarily, and I don't know how we will track the commitment of the rich countries on this. According to ESCWA, the Arab region receives 8.5 times debt than grant. I'm bringing another point to the table here, Dr. Jamal. You can talk about funding, but the funding is basically debt. A grant is only 1/8 of what's coming to the Arab region in terms of grant. And for us and other MDBs, grants is usually a very difficult thing to tackle. From your experience in the World Bank, you know there is IDA, but not all the MDBs would have the same, perhaps, resources to deal with the grants. And the Arab region is really being deprived from this grant money. Only 6 Arab LDCs, least developed member countries, are getting less than 5% of this total commitment to the region. So from our side here, maybe this is a good segue to get into the second part of the question. And forgive me, I'm speaking not knowing my technological situation here, but I hope that you are hearing me very well, and maybe I can take a couple of more minutes.
We can hear you very well, but I can give you a couple of more minutes because I would like to have a debate.
Couple of more minutes, and then I will be quiet and be humbled by my technology capabilities here. In IDB, we are committed to trying to mobilize resources for the sustainable finance and green finance. We have several instruments, but I think Dr. Ahmed just mentioned the sukuk. The sukuk is what's equivalent of an Islamic bond. Not really, but this is how close as close as it gets to the issue of bonds. IDB issued 1 billion euro green sukuk 2019 and 2.5 billion sustainability sukuk in 2021. This is for green and social projects. This is the largest of its kind, by the way, in terms of sukuk. Our experience, you asked about the Arab region, Jamal, our experience has led us to believe that there is both an incentive and a market for sukuk of such niche nature on sustainability in the Arab world. There is no dearth of that. The key is to identify the right kind of projects and then reach out to the right investors. And investors are hungry for such elements. So maybe this is a good point to also talk about sukuk as part of the Islamic financial products. It's asset-backed, it's risk-sharing, it's ethical modalities, and this is all in line with the ESG consideration under the SDGs. Total finance assets is about $35 trillion in the world. 1/3 of this is counted as sustainable finance or sustainable investments. The potential for global Islamic finance assets is anticipated to be about $4.3 trillion by 2025. Hence, the sustainable Islamic finance assets could reach about 1 trillion in the next few years. Much of it is driven by the Arab world, by the way. Much of it is driven by the Arab investors. So to conclude, I think the green sukuk, the green Islamic finance issues are very important. We need to think of the long-term strategies to support the member countries in the just transition. We cannot just look the other way and just mimic what the others are saying in the north or in the west. We need to emphasize the issue of just transition and be careful with the social and economic impacts. And finally, MDBs should really walk the talk, adopting the green financing and prioritizing the greener investments. But these green assets need to be better utilized to back up the issuance of a green sukuk to sustain the momentum of this virtuous cycle, basically. Just as an Islamic development bank, I just like to bring the attention that given the global acceptance and the enhanced robustness, we call for considering asset-based Islamic finance modalities among the other potential tools available for the development community. So this is just an additional instrument, especially for the Arab region, not to be ignored given the appetite of the investors. And this is not in my notes, Jamal, but you provoked me with the wealth, sovereign wealth engagement. And yes, I've had some experience in the past, and it's a point of pain to see the sovereign funds buying buildings in London, in New York, and in Tokyo. And sometimes they buy even football clubs and other things. And as a development practitioners, I just have to say my heart is really not easy. And we would love to see the sovereign wealth fund really direct at least a percentage of, we understand the risk involved, and it's sovereign funds are the money of the future generations. And
I can't hear you anymore. And maybe it's Rami, maybe I need at this stage to open it up for discussion. Thanks a lot for all the panelists. You've done a fantastic job. I will not summarize at this stage because I would like to open it up. However, what I'm hearing today is that we have some form of policy, like in Jordan or Egypt, going on the right direction. What we hear is that some entrepreneurs are trying hard. However, multinationals are taking much of the room, and therefore they are not able to complete properly. What I'm hearing is that infrastructure, green possibility are there. What I'm hearing even more interesting, money is not a problem actually. So what's the problem? If money is not the problem, and I think Ahmed gave us a very good presentation together with Rami about the situation, how much fund is coming. Is it an issue of suppressed demand or suppressed offer? Right. My first question to the panelists. Second, how investors believe in green technology, as you said, Ahmed, but they are not coming as bigger amount as they should be, especially that we are still doing a lot of debt financing, as you know from the ESCO figures, and this region is not getting any grant to leverage some of those debt funding. So we are instead of being in a win-win situation, we are putting ourselves in a prison, and we have what we call this prisoner dilemma. I am freed, I want to go out of the prison, but actually I'm comfortable in the prison, so I don't know what to do. So my question to everybody, what do we do not to speed up or scale up only? What do we do to leapfrog to green technology, to go toward not necessarily economic growth, or maybe, Rami, the green growth is bothering you. I will call smart growth, because the smart growth has to be green as much. Let me open the panel. Let me open the discussion among who want to speak. I know that there are some people already asked a question, including Mr. Faisal Al-Fadl. Mr. Faisal, I will come back to you once I hear from others. I don't know if you have other hands open. Can you see, Mario, from your side? Or anybody in the room here?
From here, no hand.
If not, I can ask the panelists, each of you, in half a minute, what do you hear from that session? Let me start again now with...
Arwa Hani and Leela Alafi.
Okay, who do you have?
Arwa Hani and Leela Alafi.
Arwa, do you have a question or comment? Or nothing?
A question. She has a question.
You want to speak or you want to write it? Can you, somebody turn her on?
Yes.
Can you
Okay.
hear?
Yeah. Now she can.
Here you are. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? I think I'm
Yes, I can hear you now.
Perfect. Thank you for giving me the floor. So the International Federation of Medical Student Association recognizes and appreciates the important point mentioned in this discussion. As a representative of 1.3 medical students from all over the globe, my question would be focusing more on health and recognizing that climate crisis is a health crisis that requires multidisciplinary action in terms of mitigation, resilience, and efforts that aim to building sustainable systems. Given that the health sector is a significant contributor to the greenhouse emissions globally, contributing to as much as 25% of the total public sector emissions, as well as pollutants such as toxic chemicals. How can these ideas mentioned in this discussion be adapted into building sustainable and resilient health systems? I hope my question was clear, and thank you.
That's the question. Thank you. Maybe I should ask Mr. Faidal Al-Fadl, you have a question from the Saudi Green Building? Question?
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for giving the chance for the intervention. Really, the question is, how do you guys see the measures that has been applied on these policies? It's obvious from the panelist exposure into the policy is there throughout the region, but the question is, how is it measured and how is it also been reported? And as well, how is it been verified? We know the policies has been already, the leadership have put it in place, but how has it really been applied locally? Thank you for.
This is a very good question. I like it very much. Basically, we have in this region a tendency to produce the best policy, then we put them on the shelf, we forget about them, then we start rewriting them again, and then we forget that we've done it. So how do we walk the talk, in other words? Any other question before I open the discussion? Leela, question? Sorry, the gentleman near you. You want to ask question? No, but not that. You want to ask question?
السلام عليكم صوتي واضح.
Go ahead, like. ليلى.
ليلى صوتي واضح مسموع تسمعوا فيا؟
نعم.
Yes.
بداية السيدات والسادة الكرام لحضراتكم جميعا تحية مني أنا دكتورة ليلى اللافي رئيسة وحدة دعم وتمكين المرأة بالمجلس الرئاسي دولة ليبيا ورئيسة فريق الهدف الخامس بلجنة التنمية المستدامة في دولة ليبيا. يسعدني في هذه الفرصة نقدم واجب الشكر والتقدير الكريمة لنا المشاركة في هذا الحدث المعني بالمنتدى العربي التنمية المستدامة ونقدم كل ما قدمتوه من محاور مهمة جدا جدا. ولكن كما تعلمون يعني وهو معروف حضراتكم لدى حضراتكم جميعا التعافي الأخضر من ضمن الخطط التي تستهدف قطاعات المياه طبعا والطاقة والنقل والمياه والسياحة بالذات ويرتكز عليه أكيد عدة ركائز أهمهم حد من مصادر التلوث.
لا ممكن لو سمحتي شو السؤال؟
ما هي مقدمة يعني للسؤال.
ما عندي وقت لمقدمة لو سمحت.
تمام أوكي.
في كثير ناس بدي أسأل سؤال.
بيقصد إنه هو الأكثر شيء اللي يرتكز على الحد من التلوث وكما تعرفوا يعني الحروب ما تخلفش من وراها إلا تدمير والتفتيت والتلوث بسبب المتفجرات والأسلحة المستخدمة. سؤالي هل يمكن أن نضع مبادئ محددة أو خطة ذات خصوصية أو سياسات وتدابير معينة أو حتى أولويات لتحقيق التعافي الأخضر في الدول التي شهدت حروبا ونزاعات حالة عدم الاستقرار وتعاني مخلفات الحروب والألغام؟ مشكورين جدا.
أوكي شكرا.
دكتورة سلوى محمد علي.
آخر واحد بعدين بدي أسأل بدي أفتح الديبيت.
دكتورة سلوى.
دكتور محمد علي.
دكتورة سلوى محمد علي.
دكتور سلوى محمد علي.
ايوه صباح
سؤال لو سمحتي.
صباح الخير الاول.
صباح الخير.
مش هتقدر ترد علي. صباح الخير. صباح الخير على حضراتكم جميعا. سؤالي مركز وتحديدا هو كيفية التأثير وإلزام الدول الكبرى اللي هي ليها أثر كبير في التغيرات المناخية في دفع التزاماتها المالية في صندوق التكيف المناخي المفروض في توصية ب$100 مليون. وتحياتي لكم جميعا. شكرا جزيلا.
Very good question. Colleague panelists, you heard a different question. Let me start by asking each of you to take 1 minute. You heard each of you. On the one hand, people are telling us why some policy are implemented. How can we monitor that they are being done? We heard very clearly from Rami that his concern about the green goals is that some job will be lost. And therefore, my question back to you, why we don't talk about climate job? Why we have to talk about displacing job? For instance, ILO right now has defined adaptation job. which is a very interesting concept on which I'm working on it personally with the Global Center on Adaptation, and why this region is not going with adaptation job instead of saying we are just proving job. Ahmed, we need to hear more from you about the investor who believe in the green transition. How can we help to do much more? We need to hear much more on the technology transfer and the technology creation from Noura, if it's possible, because I don't think the transfer is being done as it should be. And finally, I would like to hear about South-South collaboration, why this region is not getting much more knowledge from what's happening around the world in terms of green growth. So let me start maybe with the same list that we have right now. Maybe Shada, if you don't mind, if you give us 1 minute point of view of one of the issue or some of the issue. Shada?
Thank you, Doctor. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I wanted to, Doctor, react to your question about, we have an abundance of planning that doesn't get translated into actual projects. I think what's helped for us in Jordan is to really get ministries of planning and finance aligned with what is being talked about with the Ministry of Environment. How we're doing that is actually we're updating our financial management system in Jordan, introducing things like monitoring, reporting, and verification systems that tend to link project development from the onset with the ministries of planning, ensuring that projects are tagged through the national budget, and then identifying, the gap needed for international finance. So I think what we're starting to see how a lot of our plans can really be translated to the ground into financing and projects that are more tangible. Thank you.
But meanwhile, I have another question that came that could help as well. And let me add it for all of you, because it's all about partnership at the end of the day. The question that came back is what kind of partnership in the Arab region could enhance the green recovery and the climate finance, given the complementarity and dissimilarity in the economic structure. This is very interesting. We have similarity, but we have different structure. And I think inequality, I would add to that question, because we have wealth, not distribution equally, and therefore would create us much more difficult green recovery. Maybe you should discuss this one as an economist.
Thank you.
I don't want to answer that question.
No, that's a very complicated question because it mixes politics with economy with a lot of other dimensions. But I'll get back to it at the end of my intervention. Just maybe to start with, green recovery is not anymore a technical issue. I think it should be part of the social contract of our countries. So Shada referred to that. I think it needs to be reflected in national strategies. It needs to be reflected at all levels of society, because it's the only way forward. Again, I go back to that kind of trade-off discussion earlier. It's not anymore a decision. It's a one-way ticket. You or take it or you don't. So I think that's very important for the entire society and whole of a country approach to have on really negotiating that new social contract that will include the green dimension into it, from the poorest to the wealthiest, from the different services to infrastructure to policy to all of that. So I think that's very important. And that's the entry point that will fill in eventually the gap between offer and demand that you've been talking about. Is it a financing demand? Is it an offer demand? Et cetera, and et cetera. I think we had the question also in terms of conflict. I think every country today is going through a shock of some kind. And every country today has the opportunity to eventually rise from those shocks in a green manner. So is it conflict, fragility, political, economic, COVID, financial, whatever the shock is, there are pathways eventually to transition into that green recovery. It will be more challenging for some than others. Some will have access to grants, others will have access to credit and debt, as has been highlighted earlier. But the opportunities are there for everyone to serve that transition. And I'll touch into the final question that Jamal put on the table, which is, what are the complementarities? The complementarities are in water. Most of our countries share water resources in one way or the other. In terms of underground or overground water. Most of our Arab world and Arab countries have complementary environment seasons, etc. When it's warm somewhere, it's cold in another place, or better season. So we can think about an environmental approach to tourism, to other type of economic sectors, to labor, to productivity, that could be mobile between countries eventually in one way or the other. Energy, we're very complementary as well. You know, where we have more sun, where we have more wind, where we have more infrastructure, how we can, and the conversation is there. But inevitably, I think the wars in the region has made it, and the conflicts has made it harder to reach consensus politically. So I think that we have a lot of complementarities, but I think the challenge is more, you know, how to bring those into the political discussion as well.
Thank you. Noura, and focus please on the technology issue. No, you will have everybody will speak, so you don't have to raise your hand if you are a panelist. I'm going one by one. Noura, I need to hear more about the technology transfer, the technology creation. This region is rich. Sovereign funds are not informing in any innovative ideas as it should be. It's not about money. Why this region is not leader in green technology? Why we are not able to take the solar desalination that you are doing in Saudi Arabia and create it there rather than importing that technology? Why we are not moving the third generation of desalination of water and not continue to import the technology and being stuck by property rights? How do you explain that, again, prisoner dilemma, where I think we can have innovation, we have entrepreneur, we have creativity, we have funding, as our colleague from APCO said. What is the issue?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jamal. So for sure, there is a great potential and golden opportunity for regional cooperation and collaboration, specifically in technology development. You know, Saudi Arabia is leading the way, perhaps in solar desalination, in the largest one in Khafji plant. But the success of this plant means the success in the region, because any technology that works in this limited climate and with the similar challenges that are shared in the Arab region, whether it's the heat or the water poverty, since the region is sharing these challenges, challenges that require adaptation to climate change. Then there must be collaboration amongst these countries. The Middle Green Initiative is evidently an important initiative, because it's one of the most important collaboration projects in climate mitigation and adaptation, where Saudi has created the Middle East Green Fund of 39 billion Saudi riyal. It is funding the afforestation across the Middle East region for planting 40 billion trees, and this will greatly enhance the carbon sink in the region. It's also doing the same in the Saudi Green Initiative, where it's planting 10 billion trees in the country. So such collaborative projects is important. There's also the Net Zero Producers Forum, where Saudi Arabia is collaborating with the US, Canada, Norway, and Qatar from the region, who together make 40% of global oil and gas production. And they're working together to reach the net zero targets. There is also the global pledge to reduce global methane emissions by 30% by 2030. So these pledges and announcements, although voluntary in nature, they create a great platform for collaboration and for working together, which will entice investments in these carbon management and emissions management technologies. So
okay.
These are some examples.
I have to stop you here, Noura, so I'll give a chance to your colleague to speak, because I was told we have to leave the room in a few minutes. I'm the bad guy. Hajar, you have 1 minute. And we can't hear you.
Yeah, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I was a little bit triggered by the question of job loss in the energy transitions. So from conceptual perspective, employment will be affected as climate policies reorient the economy towards greater sustainability, which will provide job creation, job substitution, and job elimination and transformation. So the scale and extent of these changes depend on the speed and the breadth of the technological and market changes in the green transformation. So policymakers must smooth the edge of this transformation by developing just transition policies for affected workers, enterprises, and their communities. So the employment impacts of a shift towards climate-compatible economy are most directly results of changes in government policy changes that would be translated into changes in the investments, trade, and productivity. And that leads us for the regional collaboration between the countries. For example, Morocco just launched a new production firm to produce solar systems in northern Morocco. So maybe if we have more open collaboration, open more these opportunities for trade at regional level, we can build an ecosystem which is more effective for green transition in more solid, collaborative or solidar way. So just the last point, you've been talking about the existing funding and existing mechanism. Indeed, there are existing mechanisms to accompany this transition, but we can give help to this young youth and young-led entrepreneurship by blending them into those mechanisms and incentives. The existing incentives given to the SMEs, we can just blend the young and these new green entrepreneurs and serving them and making them as part of this incentive, in some way integrating them and obliging the SMEs to work with them as part of the incentives given from the government.
Thank you. This is very good. I would have loved to hear that argument and the main argument. This is pretty good, actually. Ahmed and Rami, from your perspective.
نعم.
Ahmed, would you start?
شكرا جمال. بس إضافات سريعة على ما ذكرته في مقدمتي الأولى وعلى بعض الأسئلة التي طرحت. الطلب على المشاريع، على تمويل المشاريع الخضراء موجود وليس فيه أي نقص. على سبيل المثال أبيكورب زادت تمويلها الأخضر بنسبة about 400% in the last 5 years, reaching حوالي 15% من التوتال 10 بليون US dollar total portfolio لتلبية التمويل الأخضر لمشاريع سواء في القطاع العام أو في القطاع الخاص في الدول المصدرة للطاقة وفي الدول المستوردة للطاقة في منطقتنا العربية أو حتى على صعيد الأساميز. هذا جانب. الجانب الآخر نسبة الاستثمار القطاع الخاص في تنفيذ مشاريع الطاقة في المنطقة العربية زاد من حوالي 8.5% قبل 5 سنوات إلى حوالي 27% اليوم، وهذا يعني بحكم إحصائيات تقوم بها أبيكورب كل سنة لتراكينج البرايفت سيكتور انرجي انفستمنت في المنطقة. فبالتالي دور القطاع الخاص أيضا موجود ويحتاج إلى دعم. للإجابة على سؤالك أخي جمال بالنسبة ماذا ينقص المنطقة ومؤسسات المنطقة وصناديقها السيادية حتى تدخل في هذا المضمار، ينقصها أمرين في اعتقادي، وهذا من تجربة الأبيكورب التي ذكرتها في مجال التمويل الأخضر. الأمر الأول هو الإيمان بأنه ليس هناك تعارض بين الربحية وتحقيق أرباح وبين دعم مشاريع فيها sustainability وفيها الجانب الاستدامة وجانب النمو الأخضر. ليس هناك تعارض بين الاثنين، والأمثلة كثيرة على ذلك. الصناديق السيادية العربية لا زالت لم تصل إلى هذا الفهم وإلى هذه القناعة. الأمر الثاني أو الشرط الثاني هو التحضير المهم، التحضير اللازم حتى يمكن لهذه المؤسسات أن تصدر سندات خضراء أو ما شابه من الأدوات الاستثمارية الخضراء. حتى تنجح أبيكورب في إصدارها الأخضر الذي ذكرت بعض تفاصيله، كان لابد علينا أن نحضر الإطار الذي يحكم هذا التمويل، سواء في موضوع الSEG أو في موضوع الريبورتينج أو في موضوع الديسكلوجر، لأن المستثمرين الذين اشتروا ورقة أبيكورب لابد لهم أن يطمئنوا بأن عوائد استثمارهم سوف توضع في المكان الصحيح. هناك أيضا تقييم ريتنج حصلنا عليه بالنسبة للإكسبكتد إمباكت أوف أور جرين فاينانسينج قبل أن نذهب إلى الأسواق، وهذا الذي أدى، وكانت يعني ريتنج عالي، وهذا الذي أدى إلى الطلب الكبير على ورقة أبيكورب كما ذكرت. آخر نقطة هي الشراكة. لابد للمؤسسات التمويلية العربية أن تدخل في استراتيجية شراكة في هذا الجانب. على سبيل المثال قمنا مع البنك الإسلامي للتنمية، والأخ رامي موجود، بإنشاء صندوق قبل حوالي شهرين، صندوق of $1 billion مليار دولار أمريكي لدعم مشاريع البنية التحتية في مجال خاصة في قطاع الطاقة، حتى ندخل كل هذه العناصر المطلوبة على التمويل، وفي نفس الوقت mobilizing additional funding من بقية المؤسسات التمويلية والبنوك الاستثمارية والتجارية في هذا الجانب. فالشراكة مطلوبة، ومن غيرها سوف تكون النتائج متواضعة. أشكرك أخي جمال.
شكرا كثير. Rami, you have 1 minute, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, thank you, Jamal, for your dynamic moderation of this. I agree with Dr. Ahmed from ABICORB مع السيد سليم من البنك الدولي والسيدة هاجر كذلك أدرس النقاط اللي حبيت إني أقولها. لكن just to conclude, I think the issue of just transition is very important to be on the agenda all the time as we devise policies. The issues of jobs need to be also on the agenda of the education policies in our countries in the Arab region. It's nice to say there will be new type of jobs and innovative, but are these things reflected in the educational policies, in the vocational training, in the higher education? This aspect, I think, need to be also finding its way to the educational policy making in our member countries. But I agree with the former speakers, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
اوكي جمال أيت محمد، المندوبية السامية للتخطيط بالمملكة المغربية. سأعطيكم نظرة موجزة عن التعافي الأخضر بالمغرب، حيث ترتكز رؤية المغرب فيما يخص مكافحة التغير المناخي على جعل سكنته وترابه وحضارته أكثر مقاومة وقدرة على التصدي لآثار التغير المناخي، مع ضمان الانتقال السريع إلى الاقتصاد الأخضر منخفض الكربون، وذلك من خلال اعتماد مجموعة من السياسات. فعلى المستوى الاستراتيجي وضع المغرب مخططه الوطني للمناخ، بالإضافة إلى مساهمته في وضع مخطط الوطني 2020-2030 وفقا لأحكام والتزامات اتفاق باريس، كما يتضمن المخطط الوطني الاستراتيجي للتكيف إجراءات ذات أولوية للتكيف في القطاعات والأنظمة البيئية الأكثر تأثرا بالتغير المناخي، مثلا في مجال التكيف، ثم في مجال التخفيف من انبعاثات غازات الاحتباس الحراري. في مجال تخفيف من انبعاثات غازات الاحتباس الحراري، رفعت المملكة المغربية من طموح مساهمتها باستهداف تخفيف إجمالي الانبعاثات غازات الدفيئة يصل إلى 45.5% بحلول سنة 2030، بما في ذلك هدف غير مشروط بالدعم الدولي بنسبة 18.3% مقارنة بالسيناريو الأساسي، والذي يتوافق مع تغيير في الانبعاثات وفقا للمسار الطبيعي للأعمال. ويعتمد سيناريو التخفيف المؤدي إلى الهدف الرئيسي على 61 مشروع، منها 34 مشروعا غير مشروط و27 مشروعا مشروطا بالتمويل الدولي. على مستوى التمويل والاستثمار، تقدر التكلفة الإجمالية لإجراءات التخفيف المدرجة في المساهمة المحددة وطنيا بحوالي 39 مليار دولار أمريكي، منها 21.5 مليار ضمن المشاريع المشروطة. ويتطلب تنفيذ المساهمة المحددة وطنيا استثمارات كبيرة تتجاوز الإمكانيات المالية لفاعل واحد، بل تستوجب تضافر الجهود بين الحكومة والقطاع الخاص والمؤسسات المالية الدولية بما في ذلك الآليات المالية الجديدة للمناخ وخاصة الصندوق الأخضر. فقط بالنسبة لمسألة تحلية المياه، تبذل المغرب جهود لتعزيز تعبئة المياه غير التقليدية ولا سيما تحلية مياه البحر، تصفية مياه الشرب المشبعة بالمعادن، وإعادة استخدام المياه العادمة المعالجة. وتبلغ الطاقة الإنتاجية الإجمالية الحالية لمحطات تحلية مياه البحر 156,470 متر مكعب في اليوم من خلال 6 محطات لتوفير احتياجات مياه الشرب ومحطتين لتلبية الاحتياجات الصناعية لمجموعة المكتب الشريف للفوسفات بطاقة 26.4 مليون متر مكعب في السنة. وشكرا.
بارك الله فيك. Try to put this together and try to find some conclusion. First of all, this was very exciting as usual. I would like to start thanking my colleague Mona and Esqua for the opportunity to have this panel. Mario for a very well done job organizing all of us, putting us on that table. I think we did fine. Colleague Salim and others have joined us. This is my take. First of all, if I look at key barriers that we are facing here, we have high level of exposure and vulnerability to climate change in this region. We have no choice but to tackle it because of the regional characteristic, freshwater scarcity, aridity, increased urbanization, poverty, fragility, conflict. This is what we call the perfect storm all coming together. We have limited adaptive capacity in many countries and inadequate policy and planning response. We start thinking about something. Jordan is a good example. Morocco has been doing it very low-key. I know that place very well. Tunisia is going on the right direction. Egypt is getting much more geared toward it. The rest of the regions is okay. Lebanon, I will not talk about our beautiful country. We have other priority than climate finance right now. We need fascist finance. If I look at the Gulf countries, it's different challenges. It's a transition, it's economic growth, what kind of city development, what kind of planning. We see the giant Saudi Arabia reconfiguring all the urban planning of the country. And this is gonna change the whole geography of the region. But at the same time, unfortunately, we have limited technical and research capacity. We have a lot of university, but we are not able to break through. We have also insufficient quantity and quality of finance, technology, and capacity building support. And that's why you all alluded, including what we hear from different people. What's interesting here, some countries in the region have succeeded, as you said, all in securing funding from the Green Climate Fund. Interesting, Bahrain was able to get, Comoros, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan. Other countries have tapped into or seeking to access to the region's program to assist with project preparation. But all of them are telling me the same thing. They have difficulties to put on the table bankable proposal, and this is an obstacle to accessing funding. We don't see enough project coming on the table. Why? Because come back to the first concern, inadequate planning, inadequate pipeline, inadequate project preparation, and traditional approach that we have been going. So this is what I call the key barrier that we moved on. But what I think we have to think about it also is that in the last year with the post-COVID, a lot of the regions have changed completely their approach. And what's very interesting, the IMF also, as a main player, has been playing an important role to help us in this recovery. They have been putting fiscal policy incentive schemes. Our region is not necessarily profiting of any of them. They are working on financial sector policy, including insurance schemes. They are scaling up on the debt swap to climate. Thank God here we have seen Jordan moving in that direction thanks to the work of Esqua and the team that is of Jordan. I think Tunisia will be next, Egypt. We can see some of those debt swap happening. The green bond, I think I agree with you, Ahmad. It's going on the right direction, but I haven't seen enough on liquidity facility, financial caution or backstop facility that the IMF is pushing to design. We have issue of regulation and disclosure, which is still an issue for all of us. So these are the constraints and also what's happening. All of us make me then make 4 conclusions for you. It's important to stress on the idea of resilience and to contemplate a new green pathway to growth. This pathway could be smart, Could be traditional, could be green, but if this region has to create a job, they have to go toward green jobs. It's not about losing jobs. And this is the opportunity that we should not lose this time. We lost so many opportunities in this region. This is the right time to pick up that battle properly and be in the game, not outside the game. I always hear the dilemma. We are producing oil and therefore we have to continue. Let's face the reality. If you want to produce oil, then you need to put carbon tax. You cannot have it both ways. We cannot have at the same time continue business as usual and pretend we're doing green growth. It will not work. Somebody has to pay somewhere to protect future generation. We need urgent need to think about recovery, one of the three key elements of the pandemic, because nearly 80% of the global recovery spending are either not considering environmental dimension right now or any green around the world. So we're talking post-COVID recovery, but in reality, this is not reflected properly in the macroeconomic framework. The region here is even higher. If you look at any budget that went to any government in the last 18 months, few of them are putting green recovery in the center. They talk about it outside, but when it comes to Minister of Finance, who has to allocate incentives, not there. What another message is partnership, coordination, coherence are vital for green recovery. And that's what we heard here. It's very important if you want to have this transition. Inclusive green growth strategy and policy must be tailored to a country's circumstances. We cannot have something like Arab region green growth strategy. You can have element of it, but you need to tailor to your physical endowment, institutional capacity, social, economic, environmental challenges. And therefore, the work that the World Bank started on the climate assessment, in my opinion, is essential because this will help countries do the right planning. What is good in Morocco is different from what's good in Yemen. And what's good in Yemen is not the same what's in Syria, Jordan, or Lebanon. And there is this notion that we can have something at the Arab level discussion. It's not the same. We can have it at sector level, agriculture, food security. We can have it at the water level. But when it comes to an issue like this one, it has to be much more tailored. Green infrastructure need to protect, enhance nature and nature practices and integrate it into spatial planning and development. We cannot have this coming out of the blue. It has to be integrated. Finally, regional cooperation is crucial to address transboundary environmental challenges and maximize the benefit from the green recovery. Green recovery, green economy is a good thing to do. It has a good co-benefit. It's not a liability. And I think that's why the change has to be done and what I heard from my colleague. I would like to thank all of you for your attention. Thanks for a job well done. Mario, well done. Mona, thank you. And have a good, wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.